What is the scariest thing you've ever experienced? I want to hear your story. Comment down below. I was 19 years old and it was the middle of summer. I was working at a sleepaway camp as a lifeguard. It was my first year and I was only working part-time. I had just finished high school the week before and I was going to college in the fall. And the counselors would always tell us, "Don't worry, nothing bad ever happens at Camp North Star." Camp North Star being the name of the camp I was working at. The last thing I remember that night was hearing the other girls in the cabin singing in their bunk beds. I was in the bottom bunk and I remember thinking, how are they not tired? We were up late again last night. But I was really tired, so I didn't say anything. I just turned over and went to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up to what sounded like screams in the forest. Big, guttural screams. Obviously, I was freaked out sitting in my bed not knowing what was out there. Then I started hearing what sounded like hail for about 5 minutes, followed by heavy footsteps near our cabin. My cabin mates and I started freaking out, making tons of noise, turning on all of our overhead lights and screaming for the counselors. Then the commotion outside the cabin stopped. Maybe it was a bear, we thought, or maybe some big animals. So we all went back to sleep with our lights still on. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, we told the counselors about what happened. They just laughed and said, "See, I told you nothing ever happens here." Well, 2 days later it happened again. Same thing, screams in the forest, hail for 5 minutes, then footsteps near our cabin. Again, my cabin mates and I made tons of noise and the commotion outside the cabin stopped. Again, we told the counselors who again just laughed and said, "See, I told you nothing ever happens here." 3 nights later, I was awoken in my bunk to what sounded like screams right outside my window. I'll never forget this sound. It was a woman's voice screaming, "Help me, please help me." I started to freak out, but I couldn't get out of my bunk because the girl above me was taking up the entire top bunk with her stuff. I started pounding on the wall of my bunk to get her attention. I was like, "Hey, wake up, come help me." She just kept on sleeping. I don't know why I didn't just climb over her. I guess I was just really scared. So I started screaming for help, and the girl above me finally woke up. By this time, the voice outside the window had stopped, and when she finally got out of bed, I explained to her what I had heard and asked her to go check it out. She said, "Are you crazy? I'm not going out there." I begged her, I think, for about 5 minutes, but she refused to get out of the cabin. So I did. As soon as I opened the door, the fire alarm went off and every single cabin on either side of ours started screaming and pounding on their doors. Then the fire alarm stopped. I looked over at the cabin next to us and saw smoke coming from underneath their door. Their screen windows were also on the ground, and their door was slightly open. So I ran over there and started knocking on the door, yelling, "Fire! Everyone get out!" When I finally got the door open, it was pitch black inside. All I could see were the flames coming from underneath the door. I started to panic because I couldn't find anyone. I started feeling around for people in the darkness and quickly ran outside with 2 sleeping bags. I don't even remember going outside. I just remember holding these 2 sleeping bags in my arms and screaming for everyone to wake up. That's when I heard the most terrifying sound, the screams of 200 teenagers running for their lives as the cabins started to catch on fire. I will never forget that sound. I tried to run away, but I tripped and fell and scraped up my whole right side. I remember sitting there in shock as I watched the whole camp burn to the ground. When the fire was finally put out, the counselors started taking attendance to make sure everyone was okay. I remember sitting there with my head in my hands when one of the counselors came over and asked me if I was okay. I just looked up at him and said, "Where's everyone?" He told me that everyone was okay and that no one was hurt. And that's when I realized I wasn't hurt either. But I had a wild look on my face and my clothes were covered in soot. I looked like I had just ran out of a burning building, which I guess I had. But I wasn't hurt. I was just in shock. The scariest part of it all was that I knew what had happened to the cabin next to mine, but I had no idea what had happened to the rest of the cabins. I mean, I literally ran out of that camp with 2 sleeping bags. I didn't know if people were burned alive in their cabins or if they had jumped into the lake. I honestly had no idea what I was thinking. Well, fast forward a year, and I'm now 20 years old. I'm getting ready for bed, and I hear a knock at my front door. I open it and see a girl standing there that I haven't seen since that fateful summer. She's crying and says, "I need your help." I bring her in and she explains to me that her mom died in the fire and that she was adopted and her adoptive parents didn't want her anymore. I felt so bad for her and let her stay over. Now, whenever I see her, we both get a huge fright because we're reminded of that summer. But I'm so glad that I got to be there for her and that she was okay. And that is the scariest thing I have ever experienced.